There's a subset of games I'd never fully understood. Call them life simulation games or what have you, but titles like Farm Simulator, The Sims, and yes, Animal Crossing just seem to bounce off of me. These games, of course, have their audience, as The Sims' success and my spouse's close to 1,500 hours on Animal Crossing New Horizons can attest to. For me, it was a case of going, why play this when you can just, I don't know, experience life? It was an unfair assessment on my part. As I read this part to my spouse the first time I wrote it, they smartly pointed out, "Excuse me, sir, do you have a robot octopus you can give a coconut as a gift to at midnight?" These games are not exactly like life, and no, I do not have a robot octopus. Thank you for reminding me of that hole in my life, sweetie. In any case, I just didn't see the point, and I also applied that logic to sports games, but we'll focus on these simulation games, and how my bouncing off of them might be an aspect of my neurodivergence, ADHD in my case. I mention this because of the game that ultimately got me to try it, and set off a conflict between the two sides of my condition. Power Wash Simulator had a similar "wait, really?" reaction from me, but there was something about it that got me to go, what the heck, I'll try it. Part of this is, yes, it was free on PSN, which does make it easier to take these risks in the first place. Part of it was also I had just finished Final Fantasy XVI and wanted a simpler fare. For whatever reason, I put on the gloves and started blasting through the dirt. It's not like I have daily access to a power washer after all. Unlike my last two videos, there won't be as much of a dive into the plot here. You're a power washer, you clean dirty vehicles and structures. Yes, there is a plot beyond that, but it's mostly inconsequential to my discussion today. What kept me interested was my own hyperfixation on cleaning things, and what ultimately lost me was the tedium of the task's repetitiveness. No amount of various environments could ultimately get in the way of that. I went into this a bit cynically, of course. Oh right, like the stupid Power Wash game is really gonna stick with me that much. But then it did. I can chart this by level given that's how it's broken down. I think what really cemented the game's potential for me was the skate park level. Up to that point it'd been vehicles, a backyard, houses, but I think the skate park level is where I really first felt the serenity of the experience. Maybe it's because that's the first level I got to show to my spouse. Maybe because the skate park had an adorable fruit theme to it as you uncover watermelon-colored half-pipes and the like. Maybe its segmentation into identifiable chunks made it the smoothest level going down. For whatever reason, the hyperfixation was off to the races, like a tiny dog chasing a treat ball because it knows somewhere deep inside it there's some goddamn sausages. Oh boy howdy, Power Wash Simulator was my sausage for a hot minute there. Highlights were the carnival rides, the bathroom someone foolishly tried to turn into a nightclub, the giant tree house, the whimsy grew and grew, and the puns and silly text messages flew faster than the water I was slinging. But I felt that gnawing feeling coursing in at the back of my head. Like the tiny dog now bereft of sausage, chewing on the empty treat ball hoping to get one final taste of highly processed meaty goodness, I felt myself clinging to the power wash gun, which suddenly had turned against me somehow. Now it was tedious and repetitive. Right around the giant ship level, I put it down, and I never looked back. And yes, that is right around the time the plot of the game with ancient prophecies really gets going. But it's not the first time it's happened to me. It's not the fault of the game makers. Future Lab has a straightforward, fun, and different experience to offer that has delighted plenty. What I ultimately took away from it is that it's not my failing either. A difference of how I consume things is not a strike against me, and perhaps I've been unfair to myself. As I just mentioned, it's not the first time it's happened to me. I'm the guy who never finished a Final Fantasy game until my adulthood. I played them and just never finished them. There was inevitably some moment I would hit where my brain went, "This is good enough," and dropped it. Usually the final dungeon, or some other point where you'd be justified in telling me, "Dude, you were right there." I'm the guy who, when Harry Potter was having its initial run through pop culture, long before the author outed herself as Turftaculo, I read right up to the climax of Goblet of Fire. You know, the one where frickin' Voldemort comes back, and decided, yeah, I'm good. My spouse rectified that scenario, mind you. I have read the rest, and in hindsight, I could kind of get the sense that this was the series' high watermark. I didn't know that at the time, of course. I'm not going to credit my teenage self with that level of foresight, but time leads to better insight. In fact, in some cases, I could write off my tendency to take stories and, to quote Snoop, drop them like they're hot, as the game/book/movie hitting its emotional climax before the actual climax. Miles doesn't need to necessarily beat Kingpin at the end of Into the Spider-Verse. He's going to, of course, but the real climax of the story happens just a moment before, with Peter B. passing the torch to Miles as a true Spider-Man. Not bad, kid. Though, that's perhaps not a fitting example for this essay, as I did finish the movie, but point stands, emotional climax comes before final battle or plot climax. To keep this to a gaming example, though, Night School Studios' After Party hits its emotional climax right before the final drinking contest with Satan. That makes sense in context. As Milo and Lola repair their relationship, whether or not they get out of hell is inconsequential. Their bond has made it through the infernal. The fact that the ending does ultimately double down on this truth was unknown to me until later. But those examples of emotional climaxes and me saying, "That's why I left early," only cover so many examples. I am capable of staying past the emotional climax of a story. You think I'm gonna leave watching Return of the King before at least My Friends You Bow to No One? Hell nah. So my cutting out when the getting is going oftentimes has less to do with what's on screen and more to do with how I consume media and what's going on in my own head. My deep dive into and then ultimately bouncing off of Power Wash Simulator just kind of brought up a lot of stuff I've been unpacking for myself. I don't know that I'm going to unpack anything here that is relevant to anyone but myself, but these little videos are as much for me, or perhaps only me sometimes. I'm left reflecting on why a little wacky British water pressure adventure game has left me with this revelation about myself. Maybe it's because our media machine's tendency to uproot endings in pursuit of the next chapter and more dollas leaves the very concept of endings under threat, but that's a whole other topic for another day. There's of course a deeper layer of whether or not I feel I'm a good person, because our society has drilled into our skulls that we must always be producing, always on target, or we're not worth a damn. And I certainly don't give a rat's ass what a bunch of fat cat suits wiping their bums with $100 bills think of me, so why am I ultimately doing that to myself? I think what Power Wash Simulator has made apparent to me is that games are not bad because I don't finish them. And I'm not a bad gamer for not finishing games. Or not a bad reader for not finishing books, or not a bad TV show watcher because I watch 3 episodes, drop it for a year, and come back to it. I'm not a bad person because I oscillate between hyperfixation and that feeling of nothing sticking to me in terms of gaming appeal, or hell, in terms of my life. I know the reasons why. Societal pressures ingrained into me, and my own funny ADHD brain terrified that even my leisure time must be productive, or I'm worth a red-hot poker up the ass from the calloused hand of late-stage capitalism. Between the layers of unfinished stories, both that I've written and that I've consumed, somehow that unfinished mold has told me, you're a bad person for not finishing all this. But maybe in a way, Power Wash Simulator teaches us that life doesn't really have endings. The dirt finder doesn't stop dirt finding because we've finished this microcosm of their existence that we joined them for. There are going to be more things to power wash. And there are more stories to explore, to dive into, to start, and hang on to for as long as we can, as long as it makes sense for us to do so. Maybe you reread a story over and over and over because you're not ready to let go. Or maybe you take all these fragments of stories and tales and anecdotes and similes and fuse them together into a beautiful, stately pottery that is a mishmash of all the media you've ever consumed, all the stories you've ever loved, treasured, and sometimes even hated. Maybe I are not so bad for doing it that way. I'm not a bad person. Fuck if I don't need to hear that from myself more often. I think what I'm getting away from this game and my relationship with games are more things that I should probably discuss with a therapist, of course. I'm not foolish enough to make this, put this on the internet and yell, "Mental health restored!" But it's important to know where I'm manifesting my thoughts from, and a realization that it's okay to not be normal in how I consume media. There probably isn't a normal anyway. My brain is a collection of pottery shards, of tales and tropes and vignettes and novellas and metaphors and so much more, all banded together with rivulets of metal into one collection. It just accumulates dirt sometimes. And that's when a good power washing does wonders.